Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm David Terry, Executive Director of the National Association of State Energy Officials, and thanks for joining us for yet another of our Winter Energy Outlook conferences. We've, as most of you know, been doing these in partnership with the Department of Energy for many years, and some years we have dramatic events that make us all on the edge of our seats. This is less so this year, but always important events in this sector that make this meeting helpful. I think the other thing I would note about it is, and I recognize some faces around the room, we've encouraged over time a variety of organizations to attend. I think about certainly the people, those of us that focus on energy data, worry about winter heating fuels and the like, but also we've encouraged people from the efficiency community, from renewables, from the utility sector and others, transportation, to participate in, we all sort of learn together about the outlook for winter heating fuels, but other energy data at this meeting. And I think it's been foundational in how we approach energy emergency response, certainly, but energy planning generally and our work and programs. I want to thank in particular, and I'll introduce her in a moment, but Assistant Secretary Patricia Hoffman of the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, OE as we know it, and also Alice Lippert of OE's Energy Infrastructure and Modeling and Analysis Group. Both Alice and Patricia have been extraordinarily helpful to the industry, to the states in this area in helping to host this meeting, along with the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Howard Grunspecht is here with us today, as well as Doug McIntyre. I think as a group, they really have been models of public sector, private sector, state cooperation, and we always enjoy working with them and get a lot out of it, and for this meeting in particular. I'd also like just to note, usually we do thank yous at the end of the meeting, but just note NASEO staff and experts, Jeff Pillen and Shamika Spencer of NASEO, who help pull this meeting together, both logistically and substantively, and the co-chairs of our Energy Security Committee, one of whom is here, Doris Shansky from Nebraska Energy Office, and also Dave Gibson from the Georgia Energy Office, and many other states that are here. So we thank you for coming. I just want to touch on a couple of quick items before I turn it over to Assistant Secretary Hoffman. I think the kind of data and monitoring that we've done, we're always reminded when we get in the midst of a winter heating supply crisis of some kind. A couple of years ago when we had a more serious propane problem, we worked very closely with industry in the states. The kind of data the states were collecting and working on was a critical part of that solution. The partnerships and relationships that developed after that have been incredibly helpful. But it's also a reminder of how logistics continue to change. It's not as though we solve the energy supply picture once and we're done. These things change over time, and we know, as an example, the rail challenges because of congestion on the railways in certain parts of the country is one example. We also have weather challenges. We'll hear from Mike Helpert later this morning, who always has great information for us, but always a lot to pick up and bring to our programs and activities in the coming year. I want to mention two other projects that we're working on that rely very much on the kind of data that we'll hear about today. One is the Energy Markets and Programs Pilot. It's a competitive RFP we're conducting with the Office of Electricity and the states to do road mapping of electric system modernization and other fuels. That RFP is out currently, and several states will be selected to work with. Much of the work we do will have a lot to do with focusing on data and analysis. Some of the kind of issues today, so it's another example of, I think, the partnership we have with OE, and also obviously our energy assurance and risk assessment activities with OE. I won't go into those details now. We'll hear a little bit about them at different parts of the conference, but I'd urge you, if you're not familiar with them, particularly the non-state folks in the room, to reach out to our staff. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Assistant Secretary Patricia Hoffman. As I mentioned, Assistant Secretary Hoffman leads the Office of Electricity and Energy Reliability. She has an extraordinary breadth of knowledge across the energy system. Certainly, we think of electricity foremost, but every fuel. It's a complicated system. It's a challenging office and role that they have, and she's been an extraordinary partner, and we're happy to welcome her today.
So good morning. I also want to welcome you to the winter conference, the Winter Fuels Conference that we're having today. Before I give my remarks, I'd also like to just thank David Terry and NASEO for all their hard work. It has been a long-time partnership, but I think across the years it's provided a wealth of valuable information that most of you keep coming back to look at and understand what's happening in the energy sector and what's going on. I would also like to thank Shamika Spencer and Jeff Pillen as well from NASEO and all the NASEO team for their hard work. I'd also like to recognize the IA and our co-partner in this event today, and they also have a wealth of information that's available on the internet and through some of the documents that they've had on the energy situation in the United States. And then lastly, I'd like to thank Alice for all her hard work and all these conferences and what she's done in pulling and strategizing what the industry needs to know. As many of you know, the Winter Outlook is a forum that does bring together a lot of folks, the energy officials, policy and decision makers, and we share information about the upcoming heating season. As David mentioned, the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability is the lead agency, and we look at emergency response and also emergency preparedness for the energy sector. It is important for us to collaborate with our partners and to build our collaboration based on information that is available from the sector and around the sector of what's happening, especially with emergencies, but also in support of the development of resilience. I think this event is also an excellent time to raise awareness of the upcoming winter season. And as we do that, I'd like to emphasize what the Department of Energy is doing as we look to make the energy sector more resilient to extreme weather events. The Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability works diligently to make sure that the energy systems are resilient, reliable, efficient, and secure. We pay attention to weather a lot. It is one of our responsibilities. We have to pay attention to what's coming at us, what is happening while an event is occurring, and also how to look at the restoration after an event has occurred. For example, this past weekend, we had monitored very closely the path of Hurricane Joaquin, and we are continuing to monitor the effect of the 1,000-year flooding that continues to ravage South Carolina. After an event, we look and we evaluate and we take a hard look at some of the data to analyze the impact on the energy sector. But we also, most importantly, work very hard to drive an effective restoration process. Because one of the key things is to get the system back online and to get things back together so that consumers can continue to do their business. So I'm particularly pleased today about today's agenda as we look at the winter conference. And it focuses on not only the data, but it starts bringing in the concepts of how do we evaluate risk and how do we look at resilience. And I think those are two important themes as we move forward, as we continue to think about how the data, I would like us to think about how do we move forward in some of these conferences and discussions. We need to bring the conversation of risk and resilience stronger into the dialogue. So for risk, one of the things that we've been looking at is how do the states evaluate their risk and what is their risk profiles? In looking at risk profiles, one has to think about threats and hazards. We'd like to have an all-hazard approach so that states will understand what are some of the potential impacts to their regions. For example, the East Coast top 5 weather hazards are flood, hurricanes, tornadoes, winter storms, and thunderstorms and lightning. That's important for the states to understand, so as they look at their investment strategies, they can think about this. We also have to think about the vulnerabilities and how vulnerable the assets are within the states and the regions to some of these assets. We also have to look at consequences. What is the magnitude and effect of any sort of disaster that would have hit a region? Likewise, as we look at consequences, we have to think about criticality and what is critical within a state or region. And the final thing that David brought on that's really important is we got to stretch our knowledge in thinking about interdependencies. David mentioned the rail issues. We know from the last 2 winters, we've looked at the interdependencies between gas and electric. So as we summarize and moving forward, part of this conference hits the major points of data. How do we continue to get improved sets of data, but value-added data to educate and inform decision makers as we move forward? How do we better provide definitions of risk and understanding what are the vulnerabilities and risks that the states need to pay attention to? And then it's the outreach to all the stakeholders, consumers, the associations, the manufacturing, the energy sector itself. But what we need to think about is how do we establish what risks are acceptable and what risks are not. And I think that's going to be a challenging discussion as we move forward in the future. And I know that you will hear about risk assessments more fully from the work that OE is doing with Steve Folka in his presentation later on today. So I look forward to that discussion. As I mentioned earlier, that not only are we looking at the risk, but we are trying to evaluate. We do look backwards. We are trying to look at what have we learned from some of the past years of events. Currently, we are comparing the last two winter outlooks and what happened in the last two winters from the 2013 and 2014 winter season. And we'll have a report that will be coming out shortly. But one of the things that was highlighted really emphasizes the point again of interdependencies, such as the interdependency between the gas and electric sector. Now moving forward, what we want to do is think about resilience. So how do we take the lessons learned from the past, the information that we gain in these outlooks, and convert it to an investment strategy as we look at resilience for the future? I think we also need to think about long-term. So not only the short-term outlook, but the long-term outlook as we start thinking about resilience. Resilience is one important theme for our office, and because we ultimately want to mitigate any disasters that potentially could occur in the future, but really think about how we can make our country safer and stronger. It is upon us to determine the investments that will provide the strategies for resilience. Some of it from the electric side may be microgrids, others may be energy storage or basic hardening of the infrastructure. But that investment strategy has to be based on a risk profile and what we're willing to accept and not accept. The Department of Energy has built a foundation for looking at both of these two concepts from two documents that we've released recently. One is the Quadrennial Energy Review, and the other is the Quadrennial Technology Review. The Quadrennial Energy Review was a document that focused on several different areas. One area that I wanted to pick up on is the shared transport infrastructure, in which energy supplies compete for space on rail, barges, and other modes with other fuels and commodities. Sometimes this can drive up costs or increase delays. Dramatic increases in oil production in unconventional locations have also resulted in unexpected economic disruptions. Likewise, the Quadrennial Technology Review also defined a target strategy for investments, including enhancing grid infrastructures and the ability to serve customers' needs both economically and efficiently. So one example that I would like to highlight is the thought about storage. As we look at energy infrastructure investments, storage and well-placed storage can improve system resilience. So as you listen to the presentations today, I would like you to think about the near-term winter outlook, but also think about the long-term investments as we move forward and what we've been exposed to over years on years as we've talked from this conference. I'd like everybody to think about the 100-year storms, the 1,000-year flooding events, what we have seen, and take a step back and think about how do we execute a process for evaluating risk so that ultimately we can invest to be more resilient. So thank you.